Listening to the remarks that have preceded me, and not just from this panel, but from the inception of this conference, I have to make a couple of my own that have nothing to do with the topic I was announced to be addressing. And the first one is remarks that brought a tear to my eye as I saw it bringing the same to Danny's eye about Saul. Saul had such an effect on my life that recently I received a telephone call from Eugene Joubert-Ceci. You may know Eugene. He did Why We Fight. He did Reagan, a wonderful, wonderful documentary of the enigma that is Ronald Reagan. I don't think anybody, and I teach this at When We Marry, will ever know who Ronald Reagan was.
Even Ronald Reagan.
And the house I live in, which I was coming to, which is a total indictment of the U.S. war on drugs. It is absolutely dramatic and vivid in its condemnation of what we are doing in filling our prisons with people largely caught because of our so-called war on drugs. It brings to mind my conversation with Colin Powell in 1989 when he'd just taken over Forces Command, the largest U.S. military command inside the United States, and he told me that he had come away from being Ronald Reagan's national security advisor with an appreciation of how we were going to have to bring the military into this so-called war on drugs. And I looked at him. I'm a fresh-caught lieutenant colonel, didn't know him from Adam, and I didn't know how far I could go, but I also knew I had some principles. And I looked at him and I said, why in the world would the military want to engage in a war it cannot win? And he looked like he was surprised a bit, and he said, well, we've got to do our share, we've got to do our share. And I said, all we're going to do is make it worse than it is now, and that is precisely what we have done. It is so bad now, as you'll see from this documentary, that you have police chiefs leaving their jobs, policemen leaving their jobs, judges leaving the bench, and so forth, because they're so sick and tired of sending people to prison for what amounts to nothing more than exercising their free will. So that's the first thing I wanted to say, but I also wanted to add that one of my most vivid experiences was going to Victorville prison with Saul at his invitation. I had filled out the paperwork. I had done, I thought, everything that needed to be done to get myself through the process, and I was unable to do so. They stopped me at every walk of the way, even to the point where the warden sent his legal counsel out to acquaint me that if I pressed it any further, with the fact that if I pressed it any further, I might cause some problems and so forth and so on. At any rate, I got to sit in the waiting room at Victorville for 4 hours. 2, while Saul and I waited for an adjudication of my being able to visit Gerardo, and another 2 as Saul went in and visited him, and I gave him all my little coins that I'd gotten, because that's all you can take in is coins. And I sat in that waiting room and I watched hundreds of people come to visit their family members in that prison. Every single one of those people was Hispanic or black. That's our prison system. That is our prison system. What a disgusting experience. But I wish Saul was still here. When Eugene called me, he asked me for some advice on how to make a documentary about Cuba, and I said, oh, I got just the man for you. And then I remembered that Saul had passed away. And so I had to go down my list a little bit further, but a visible rip in the fabric of knowledge and beauty and art about Cuba passed with Saul. The second thing I just wanted to address momentarily is this business of prisoner exchange. If you watch MSNBC, you might have seen me commenting on the Bo Bergdahl incident, the transfer of 5 Taliban prisoners from Guantanamo, which incidentally should have been closed a long time ago, should never have been opened.
That's right.
For Bo. And let's go, Mr. President, you're on a roll. Let's get Alan Gross back, and let's give the 3 Cubans back. What a wonderful time. I mean, you've got one down, let's go for another. What I wanted to do, though, in respect to the substance of my remarks, was to just look at what Bill started to talk about, what Wayne talked about a little, and what Arturo talked about somewhat too. And oh, by the way, I can't fail to mention, Arturo, that what you just outlined with regard to USAID and IRI and NDI and other NGOs and human rights and so forth and the pursuit thereof in Cuba happens in Kiev, in Caracas, in Tehran, and other places in this world right now today. It is going on. If you think the coup in Kiev happened because the Ukrainians suddenly got tired of oligarchs, think something else. And if you think we didn't try to overthrow Hugo Chavez in 2002 and aren't still trying to overthrow his successor, think something else. And if you think we aren't still doing nefarious deeds in your name and with your taxpayer money under the aegis of the CIA and the military, think something else, because we are. I just want to go down a summary list here and then comment on it, because it's not anywhere near inclusive, but this is some of what's going on. March 2014, a national climate change group, including a variety of state bodies and institutions, has been created to evaluate measures designed to mitigate the effects of climate change and make adaptations, and incidentally, adaptations are something very important because, ladies and gentlemen, we're beyond amelioration, we're beyond things that would change the future. We're going to have to adapt to a lot of what is happening, like acidification of the oceans, for example. All of this is happening in Cuba. I'm not reading about President Obama's announcement, I'm reading about Cuba. Havana, Cuba, May 30th. Cuba's biopharmaceutical and chemical production enterprise, Labiopharm, launched a regional campaign to fight malaria in Western Africa. It goes on to say the malaria campaign under the supervision of Labiopharm kicked off in Ketu, South District in the Volta region on Ghana's Tongolese or eastern border, and it is going full bore. Something Bill mentioned, law number 118, 29 March 2014, the new Foreign Investment Act. Read it. I recommend it to you. Read it and tell me that Cuba isn't changing. Same month, the head of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, we've already mentioned, Thomas Donahue, visited Cuba. Here's a quotation from him. For too long, the relationship between our nations has been defined by our differences and shackled by our past. I like that. Good imagery. It does not have to be that way. It's time to begin a new chapter in U.S.-Cuba relations. Usually I don't have much to do with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce anymore, but in this case, that's a pretty good comment. May 26, Dubai, United Arab Emirates. Cuba and the UAE have signed an open skies agreement. The agreement was signed by Saif Mohammed al-Suwaidi, Director General of the UAE General Civil Aviation Authority, during his visit to Cuba. The UAE delegation designated all Emirati national airlines under the agreement. Cuba did the same. Cuba, May 26, a 30-member business delegation from Mexico, led by Economy Minister Ildefonso Guajardo Villarreal, started a 3-day visit to Cuba today with a tour of the new Special Economic Development Zone in Mariel. More to say about that in a moment. The Mexican business people will also participate in a round of negotiations with Cuban Foreign Trade Minister, et cetera, et cetera. By the way, this is a change for Mexico. It's been 12 years of cold shoulder, more or less. Mexico is changing, as anybody with a brain would. In other trade promotion news, Deputy Foreign Trade and Investment Minister Ileana Núñez Mordosh was scheduled to arrive in South Korea today, one of the most dynamic countries in the world. I had an African from Kenya in the streets of Seoul in November of last year when I was visiting Korea walk up to me and ask me why I was there. We got into a conversation, so I asked him why he was there. He said, I'm here to study the most dynamic country in the world, gone from being a debtor nation to a creditor nation in a generation. We want to see how they did it. Well, Cuba and the Koreans are talking, this was the highest ranking Cuban official to visit the Asian country since they broke diplomatic relations in 1959. Núñez will meet with South Korean business executives and so on and so on. Cuba, June 2nd. Sherritt International Corporation announced that the Cuban government extended an existing oil and gas production sharing contract in the onshore Puerto Escondido oil field for 10 years. The production sharing agreement calls for at least 7 more wells. Cuba welcomed, this is the same month, Cuba welcomed 1.28 million tourists in the first 4 months of this year, which is 60,804 more than last year during the same period. Canada continues to be the main source of foreign visitors to Cuba, followed by Germany, Britain, France, and Italy ad nauseum, but the United States is not there any big way. Berlin, June the 2nd, a new exhibition of the Cuban-German project El Vuelo de Bronze. The bronze flight was opened at the Costa Gallery in the German city of Zederik, etc., etc., etc. What point am I trying to make? The world is in Cuba. Everyone is in Cuba because everyone realizes, first of all, that these 11 million people are the most entrepreneurial, dynamic, energetic, incredible people in the Caribbean and maybe in Latin America, if I want to offend some of my Argentine and Colombian friends. They are incredible. And there's 11 plus million of them. And they're changing, and they're taking back what you might call their real sovereignty. That is to say, they are not going to surrender what they've won. Universal health care, almost universal literacy, crime-free streets, an incredibly vibrant community, art and music and so forth. They're not going to surrender that, but they realize they have some economic challenges and they want to meet them. And God bless America, she's not there. This is insanity. This is total insanity. The only fear I would have is that suddenly we would unleash ourselves on them and ruin it all. So I would be very, very careful, if I were Cuba, as to what I did with those pristine mangrove swamps and that wonderful environment they have down there, which I would just really love to fly fish in. I would love to see Cuba continue to be as recalcitrant as it has been with regard to ruining that. And no one would be willing to do that faster than us. So my point is, we need to be there. We need to be there sensibly, sanely, and soberly. But we need to be there, and we need to join the world in helping Cuba meet its challenges. Thank you.